Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Scratch that.
Great blooper.
All right, ready? Let's do it. Welcome to the Pros and Cons podcast, a podcast for emerging writers by emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like pros, sometimes we feel like cons. This is Matan. Today I took over. This does happen once in a while. We have an entirely, completely, wholly full house today, starting with Ali Burnham.
Hello, hello.
Phoenix Ray.
Hello. Oh, hello. My voice cracked.
Wait to catch attention. Patty.
Hello.
Patty's also here.
Yes.
James.
Hello.
And Alex.
Hiya.
We have a really cool conversation happening today, a conversation we wanted to have for a while, but we kind of waited until this very particular moment to have it, and we'll tell you why later. Before we jump into that, guys, what have you been up to? Have you been reading, watching, anything good?
I'll jump in with sorry.
No, go. I just said yes.
We're all so eager. I was going to pick Andor as the thing that I've just finished consuming and getting to the end of. I mean, hands up if no one wants spoilers in the group. I won't go into it too much.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if I want it spoiled yet.
So it's on Disney Plus, and so Andor Cassian, the character from Rogue One, the Star Wars movie. So we're kind of two steps removed from main Star Wars canon, but I want to go out on a limb and happily be like shot for it. But I think it is the best Star Wars property that they've ever produced. It is. Wow. It's going.
Wait.
That's
including original trilogy.
Yeah. Just because like you listen to some of the dialogue and I'm like, this is fantastic dialogue, and Star Wars has been known for good dialogue. Never. It's never something they've ever done well, but it's going under the radar because everyone's kind of like, what's Andor? Who's Andor? This is an important part of Star Wars canon. We're not going to watch it, but Andor, it's actually fantastic, and I highly recommend it.
You did just say it's better than the original, though, so don't be surprised if someone goes and burns your house down.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm happy to be. Someone's going to put their head above the parapet and say it.
Someone's going to do it.
Yeah.
We're going to go viral for all the wrong reasons.
I'm there. That's my Molotov
Well
cocktail. Yeah.
I like it.
An explosive way to start. Thank you, Ali.
We're coming in hot.
Who else wants to throw shade at some of the classics?
Oh, I can. No, go ahead, James. You go.
I was going to say, I've just read The Haunting of Hill House, which I preferred to the recent Netflix adaptation. That's my shade.
You didn't care for the Netflix adaptation much, did you?
Didn't care for it.
Yeah.
No.
Which you're objectively wrong about, by the way. But
I don't know.
It's a shitty ending. It really is. It's like that last 5 minutes or so. The rest of it's great, though.
Very well directed, and I'm a big fan of, what's his name? Flanagan?
Mike Flanagan.
Flanagan's really, really good. But I feel like he didn't stick the landing on that one.
Yeah. Well, look, now that I've taken the ball, I have been reading this. I'm going to go grab it because I can't remember its name.
Great audio.
It's called Golden Hour by Alex Eldridge.
Yeah, you're not
Has been reading it.
So a guitar student of mine who just finished up was basically like, hey, I've really enjoyed learning with you. I want to share with you some of my culture. So he gave me this.
Wow.
It's called Shahnameh, the Persian Book of Kings, and it's essentially like the Bible for Persian culture. I'm probably butchering the historical context there, but basically it's just a story of like how it's sort of a creation myth for the Persian culture, like the Iranian culture. They refer to themselves as Persians in this, and I believe they continue to. And it's just bangers. Like it's just banger after banger of like, there was this king and he was really good and he like got all there's this thing they keep using that's like basically a byword for glory. It's like Shah or something. I forget exactly what it is, but it's just like, and he had the Shah and he went and he did this and he learned all the information that was to be learned. And then he got a little bit full of himself and the Shah disappeared and then he was no longer the king. So then a demon king came and took over, just like, it's just bangers. Like, and they're really short stories too. So I've just got that on my coffee table. I'm going through that, reading one story at a time, and everyone I'm like, that was great. Like It's in that very condensed historical sort of format that you see in the Bible. So there's not a lot of detail, and the language is a little archaic, but it's really good. So yeah.
Well,
I love that.
let us know how that goes. That
Yeah.
really does sound exciting. Cool.
No spoilers, though.
Phoenix.
The Persians make it.
Yeah.
I just love the idea of like I've finally gotten around to reading the Bible. It's wild. Like it's really flicking through it. You wouldn't believe what happens halfway through.
The God character's kind of a dick, though.
A lot of controversy.
Takes a brave author to kill the main character.
Yeah. But no, I've been watching I watched Bee and Puppy Cat, and now I'm rewatching Bee and Puppy Cat with my partner. And then I'm also, it's so soothing if you just want a relaxing show to just like have on, and it's very nice to wind down. And I've been reading Frankenstein, and that has been delightful. I really like 1800s literature like that, where it's seemed to be a trend at the time to do the whole like letters and correspondence thing, like Dracula and Frankenstein. They're all, yeah, but I love it. I don't know, having a good time with that one.
The original Frankenstein is awesome. That's a really, really good book. Yeah, love that.
I'm liking it.
Patty, what have you been up to?
Well, so I wear glasses now, which
Oh.
for anyone watching the video, I've just put on a pair of glasses. I've been getting headaches when I read. I've had this for a long time. And finally, my doctor's like, you know what? Maybe you should be wearing glasses. And I do. And my God, wow. Things are actually clear now. It's fantastic.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's like HD. It's like HD. Honestly, I recommend having low-key eye damage to anyone out there, because when you put glasses on, it's fantastic. I'm finally getting around to reading book 2 of the, what do you call Hilary Mantel's trilogy? The Adventures of Henry VIII.
Yeah,
I guess.
Thomas Cromwell.
Wow.
The Adventures of Thomas Cromwell. I'm
blanking. What's the name of the second one? I have it in mind.
Bring up the bodies.
Bringing Up the Bodies, yes.
Bringing Up the Bodies, right?
And it's genius, and I'm loving it.
Wow, it is fantastic. I still have the third one, and I'm not reading it yet.
Mirror and
this
the
is going to
Light?
sound super. Yeah. This is going to sound super cheesy, but the writer Hilary Mantel has passed away recently. And knowing that she's not going to write anything more, I just had this little battle with myself, because I know that once I finish that book, it's just going to hit me like a rock, like a train.
I felt
so
the same thing.
I'm not emotionally ready to start that third book, because it has such a feeling of finality to it right now.
Oh yeah.
To be honest, I've mostly been watching the World Cup over the last few days. I've been putting the book on my lap, and then my wife just turns on whoever's kicking balls at the moment, and I've just been finding myself joining in, which is great. I am attempting to read Save the Cat, which has been recommended to me by members of this group. Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, right? A very well-known screenwriting book.
Yeah.
And I hope to apply some of these things to novel writing. So that's in my lap at the moment. Not at this moment, but in general. All right. Thanks for sharing. So today we are going to discuss the most primordial question, the first thing that a writer, no matter how young they are, have to contend with. And this is a question we answer even if we don't really understand the parameters. The first time we sit down, what kind of story are we going to write? And I'm specifically talking about genre. Now, I don't know how old were you when you did your first writing. I think I was about 6 or 5. You have no clue what a genre is. You do not know that you're not supposed to have magic and spaceships on the same short story. You just go with it. But as you get older and you get your shit together, you realize you have to separate the two. Before I ask you what you write, I just want to go on a little spiel. Speculative fiction is such a broad word at the moment. It goes over so many different subgenres. Some people even call it a supergenre, speculative fiction. Even us, I believe we're marketing our upcoming anthology, the new Mythic, as a speculative fiction anthology, because it just has so many different varieties of stories inside. And a lot of people argue it even became a Twitter thing, right? Fantasy is when you do this, science fiction is when you do that. So I'll just ask you downright, guys, what would you say is your favorite genre to read before we even go into the writing part of it?
Oof, big question.
Yeah.
That's one to think about.
It's okay if it's a close one.
I think I read primarily fantasy, and that's just, I glance at my shelf and I'm like, that it's just dominated. I've got George R. R. Martin takes up the whole top shelf. Brandon Sanderson does a good job of taking up the rest of the shelves. And then I've got Patrick Rothfuss there. Yeah, no, I've got a few others. So all the big top ones I love are just the big modern fantasies. Like there's your classic fantasies, which they're not my favorites. They're the ones I've read to consume to know where fantasy came from. But it's kind of what's happening in modern fantasy at the moment is what I love, is what I adore, and that is primarily what I consume.
So I would say that mine is a toss-up between horror, which I obviously love to write, and I think I've made that pretty clear on this podcast. But also one that the people might not be as obvious is literary. I probably read as much literary as horror, and I find that I just really like the detail of literary fiction. I just like how, like, quote unquote mundane it is, how much you can mine from just the most ordinary situations. I just really enjoy taking those details and being able to go, like, you can literally write a scene about someone just sitting in a bench, like tapping a pen, like, and you can make that so engaging. And I don't know, there's always a part of me that wants to reconcile those two aspects, like the big magical scary stuff where it's like, people are dying, and then the other stuff which is just like, I'm gonna have to tell my brother that he's gonna get kicked out of his house because the rent is late. I just find those two things so engaging. So yeah, I'd say those two.
I'll just jump in after that, or will I?
No, you go ahead, Phoenix.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to jump in because I'm in the same boat. Literary fiction is easily my favorite to read. Literary fiction leaning into magic realism. I love that. Like, I love a thin layer of
100 Years of
woven in it.
Solitude.
Yeah, 100 Years of Solitude. I read this one called Sourdough, which is very subtle magic realism. It's someone gets really is a hobbyist sourdough baker, and something is a little bit weird about their culture, their starter culture, and some stuff ensues. I'm not sure. The ending was a little.
Yeah,
but
you told me
the book I loved. The book I loved. The ending, I was like, but the book as a whole was very good. Yeah, John Irving, I love stuff he's done. The World According to Garp, A Widow for 1 Year. It's very, like, you get deep into the mundane. Like, one chapter is just him in World According to Garp. He's just like walking around his house looking for stuff to add to his book that he's writing and stuff. And it's just like, oh, this is so domestic. I love it. Yeah, so I love that stuff.
I've always really liked survival horror or character-driven survival horror in fiction.
Shocking.
Fiction memoirs of people who've survived through really, like, difficult periods in history or through really, like, cataclysmic events. So there's something about kind of persevering through stuff that I've always found very engaging. And if you're going to take that into a kind of fiction genre, it's kind of the supernatural or science fiction is kind of the ones where it's kind of a fate worse than death kind of thing can happen. That's always been my favorite to read.
Good. Patty?
Every genre is great, and good writing is good writing. Like, it transcends genre, obviously, but science fiction. Because science fiction is all about big, weird ideas. And I don't think there's any genre that quite is able to say, like, yes, but what if? And take ideas about the world and really, really run with it and take it to its, like, furthest logical extreme. Like, the best science fiction can almost be like an elaborate thought experiment. And I feel it can be so revealing about the human character. It can explore weird ideas. It can be transgressive. It can go to really uncomfortable places, which I think is great if you're interested in ideas and the way things could potentially be. And I've also, there's no genre that for me has ever made me put a book down and go like, holy shit, as much as science fiction. I've mentioned the 3-body problem before. Once you get to the 3rd book of that series, there are some ideas and events which really, like, just make you stare off into space. Go like, oh my God, that might actually be possible. And it's haunting and it will never leave you. Yeah, science fiction. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Shout out to Philip K. Dick.
That was a good sell.
Thank you.
That wasn't.
I thought about this
that
for
was
a little while.
Really good sell.
I'm passionate.
Personally,
I just wanted to add really quick, Sourdoughs by
ahead.
Robin Sloan. I just want to throw the author name in there. Robin Sloan. Sourdough.
Personally, I really love horror, love sci-fi, love fantasy.
You need to pick one,
But
Matan. You
something
can't sit on the
that's-
fence.
Yeah.
I know, I
It's not
know, I
allowed.
know. I can't sit
Yeah,
on
this is
that.
your choosing, Matan.
Okay, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna go with the subgenre. I'm gonna go with urban fantasy. And the reason I like that is because I just love the idea. If you think about something like Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, like when you look at a subway and you're like, what's happening there? It's this genre of fantasy that like depicts a world that could happen beneath our noses. Like the kind of fantasy, almost like Diagon Alley in Harry Potter. Like
Yeah.
this could, it almost goes into sci-fi territory that it describes things that could happen. Like it's just these subtle little pieces of magic in the world that coexist with our world. I find it really exciting that the fantasy happens at the same time as this. It makes me think like maybe it's really happening. Because as much as I love Narnia, you don't think to yourself, well, Narnia maybe specifically if you walk into a wardrobe. But if you read Lord of the Rings, you're not thinking to yourself, maybe Frodo's out there. Because it's so distant from what we're experiencing here. Whereas urban fantasy is like, maybe there are werewolves in the New York subway system. You know, who knows? Who to say that there aren't? So that's a genre I really enjoy.
I heard recently that a massive trope of urban fantasy is every time you see a cover, there's someone standing there with glowy hands. Can you confirm that that's a thing?
What? I have not heard this.
Wearing a trench coat and their hands are glowing.
Oh, the
No?
trench coat, yeah.
Yeah, all this
Okay.
the similar thing.
Okay.
Guys, now that you stated your favorite genre, I'm gonna pull one on you. You cannot avoid this question. You must say one thing that you do not like that much about your favorite genre. It can be a trope, it can be something that's been repeated a lot, or just anything really. Could be the names of the books. I'll start to make it easy on you. Urban fantasy. One of the things I struggle with is that every time I read one, I can't help but feel like a lot of the protagonists are pulled into something. It's kind of a trope that repeats itself. They're not in control of their story. They're just kind of, let me show you this. And they just find themselves being dragged along on a tour just because the writer sometimes really wants to showcase this world they created, which I'd rather see a protagonist discovers the world on their own, almost like a detective, rather than being showcased. That's one thing.
Mm-hmm. I've never read any urban fantasy in my life, so this is all new to me.
I'll jump in with critiquing our generic understanding of kind of the high fantasy genre, the medieval fantasy genre. I guess where I start to tire of it is it's very well trod terrain of morals and politics, in that it's so many titles only have so much to say about good versus evil and destiny. And so it's a genre that's always tied up with wanting to talk about this and always kind of arriving at the same conclusions again and again. And like, there's not a lot of meat in that gym mat after a while. You can only consume that. And then you have modern trends of authors being like, look, I don't want to write about a monarchy because our modern politics is monarchy's not good. But then you get this weird shoehorning in of like suddenly a democratic take on monarchy and medieval settings. And then that doesn't sit right either. Like it's just kind of executed poorly. So I tire of the genre when those themes are just handled poorly or just done again and again to just until it's tattered and no longer has anything to say.
True.
I think survival horror.
James.
Oh, it's cool, man.
Cool. You take
James.
No, it's all right. You know what?
You got passed to me this time.
You know what, James? You just take this one.
We need a buzzer system.
I appreciate that. I think survival horror typically tends to hinge on whether or not the characters can find a way of working together. I think that's kind of the element of where that genre comes from. But it means that you tend to have similar tropes within the group dynamic, which causes the story to kind of be a little bit predictable. And then if any story tries to reverse that, it just tends to be that the characters are working together quite well at the beginning of the story, which gives it all good dynamic. But then it means some kind of spanner has to get thrown into the works, which is either a bit of a reverse Deus Ex Machina, or one of the characters starts just making really bad decisions or really selfish decisions because they've got their own agenda. And it always feels very written into it, basically, to create more drama and to give the second half of a story a little bit more dynamic. So I think my issue with survival horror would just be that it's a bit predictable, typically, or cardboard character.
What do you mean by reverse? What do you mean by reverse Deus Ex Machina?
So if a Deus Ex Machina is like the hand of God coming in and saving the day, or it could just be coming in and intervening. But if it's usually done at the end of a story to save the day, reverse Deus Ex Machina is everything's going really well, and then the sun sets, or all three of the suns set at the same time, and the planet is plunged into darkness for who knows how long, and the monsters can only come out at night and stuff like that.
I think you see these kind of things in horror movies, like the final scare is notorious for that. Like Freddy Krueger is dead, we burned him. Oh no, he's out of the mirror again. How?
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Following along from James's thing, I reckon I'd say it always disappoints me a little bit. Like my favorite part of a horror novel is always the first 2/3. Like the last little bit where the monster is revealed. It's never as fun because no matter what it is, it can't possibly be as scary as you thought it might have been in your mind. Like I was reading this one the other day, which is like the big bad turns out to be a really strong mountain lion. And that's cool, mountain lions are scary, but it's not as scary as what I thought it might be. And that's not a commentary on the quality of the writing, which was actually excellent. But it's a big cat. Like I thought it could have been. I could have thought it'd be a bigger cat. Like it's
exactly. Mountain lions are not even the biggest cats. They're like barely top 5. When you think about it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in fairness, there was a reveal a little bit later that's a little bit more harrowing, but at the end of the day, my point is it can never be as scary or as thrilling or something as you might conceive, because the notion of being afraid of the unknown precludes that. So it's kind of a built-in, problem with it, I guess.
So you do the Lovecraft thing of always saying, but it was scarier than you can imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, they saw the monster and I couldn't possibly repeat what they saw because they lost their mind.
Kind of cheating, but of the absolute terror that was revealed.
Why did you have to say
day?
Lovecraft?
But it what do you mean? What do you mean?
You triggered all 3 of them at the same time. They all started mumbling incoherently.
Yeah, it's gonna be a nightmare to edit around.
We'll just cut it out. It's fine.
or leave it.
Sorry, go on. Matan's fine.
Now I'm going to imagine every possible book twist I've ever read, but with a mountain lion instead, and just see if it makes it better.
Oblivion, playing that back in the day.
Look, I am your mountain lion.
That'd be a great twist in a murder mystery. It's like, it was just mountain lions.
Phoenix. I'm giving you the mic. Phoenix, take over.
Thank you. I need to say this. What's that on the back of Professor Quirrell's head? It's a mountain lion. Okay.
God, I just love that Alex is burning an entire genre based on the fact he just read one bad book. The mountain lion.
I thought it might have been a little bit indicative of
I feel it. Okay. For me, for like literary fiction and magic realism, and this is one of the things, I guess it's kind of cool because it's like one of the things I like about it is also kind of thing that stings me about it a little bit, or I need to watch with my own writing, is sometimes the plot can float a little bit. It can get a little bit like metaphorical because it gets kind of deep in the human condition and just kind of gets lost in there sometimes. So sometimes I find myself like, I really like those chapters where you're doing mundane stuff around the house and then you kind of get to the end of that chapter and you're like, oh, that was nice. All right, now back to the plot. And then you're kind of, sometimes you have a moment where you're like, where was that? Where did I leave that? Like, where was the plot? And the whole plot line sometimes can get a little dampened by, sometimes the author can play with just like, what is the plot here? Like, was it really about cutting their hair, or was it about, I don't know, scarcity and the human relationship to that? Like, sometimes you can get a little bit lost with that plot point. And it's one thing that I really appreciate and can be really refreshing about like fantasy or something, because they do just like hit it home. Like, this is the plot, this is what we're doing, this is the mission. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, you know what, nice.
That's very good, because it's funny. It's the strength of literary fiction is that it overemphasizes character, style, themes over plot. But sometimes that strength, when delivered in too big a dose, can just be a bit much. So where's the balance in that? I would say that's the biggest challenge for a literary writer, is to find the delicate balance between a little bit of plot and no plot which sometimes fantasy writers, like some of my favorite books, Sanderson, who's maybe, I don't know, the king of plot, we can even say. Sometimes I feel like there's a bit too much plot. Like, let me just sit with the characters for a while and, watch them talk about how shitty training was today. But obviously he's got these huge overarching plots he has to uncover.
That's really fast. Yeah, you've made that click for me in that I'm a self-confessed like plot lover. I'm in it for the plot. So then the fact that I naturally gravitate towards fantasy makes a lot of sense. But also because of my screenwriting background, I watch a lot of movies. I mean, we all do. But I feel like I get my kind of kitchen sink fill from like a lot of movies I watch. Like Martin McDonagh's my favorite screenwriter, and he's not writing in genre. He's not writing in fantasy at all. But I adore his scenes that we're getting the Banshee of, I'm going to forget the name of it. We'll just call it the Banshee, is coming out very soon. And from what I can tell, that's a story of two men where one of them's decided they don't want to be best friends anymore and doesn't want to tell the other one why. And the other guy's losing his mind about why they don't want to be friends anymore.
That's great.
So that's what
Sounds
kicks off his
heartbreaking.
entire story. That's all it's going to be, is people being miserable in this small Irish town. And I'm very excited for it. So like those kind of stories, I get my fill from the screen, while I'm still of a mind that fantasy and sci-fi is a genre that, while I love film adaptations, they'll never quite be as good as the book. The book is where it does it better. So when I have a taste for that genre, that's what I read. I read for that because I feel like that's where it's doing it well and better, while I'll get my fill of all my other genres on the screen because they're doing it, I don't know, just as well, equally well.
Yep, definitely. I do feel like some genres don't translate as well to films. Like horror. I love horror films. I can watch so many of them. And while I do like to read horror, I usually find myself enjoying short horror stories rather than novel. There's something about being tense for an entire novel that just kind of... I can't do that too often. Like, I usually, if I read a Stephen King book, I will not read another one for 4 or 5 months, just because that was an experience. Where horror movies, I can just watch one every Friday night, move on with my life. Guys, I'll combine the next 2 questions.
Wait.
All right?
Patty still hasn't.
Oh,
Thank
sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say anything.
Thank you.
So science fiction, often the prose isn't good. Sometimes it's fine, but I think with a lot of these science fiction writers, you start out as an ideas guy, and you start out with someone with fantastic, great concepts, and maybe you're someone that can marry that to wonderful prose and good characters. But maybe you're buying your books because you are the ideas person. I mean, I mentioned Philip K. Dick before. Incredible writer, visionary, absolute madman. Not great prose, I think you could say. The writing itself, not that good. And he said before of himself, he doesn't even really consider himself a writer so much as like a philosopher, so much as just someone who wants to put ideas out there. And often the characters are pretty flat. Not always, like there's plenty of science fiction works where the characters are really strong. But I mentioned this before, like Asimov, his characters they're cardboard cutouts.
Yeah.
Well, Henry, those robots
Wow.
sure did come at us hard. I wonder why they did that. It could be because of the protonic brains.
Look at
Harry.
the Foundation series for the perfect example of that. I mean, the characters are almost literally cardboard cutouts because it's done over like multiple iterations. So you can only be with the characters and several characters at the same time for this very short amount of time. And then they're just by definition of the story, they're kind of cast away. Because it's like, and that was that generation, and now this is this one.
Absolutely. I love Foundation, but I couldn't tell you what any of the characters were or what they were like.
It is a brilliant series. I'd say it's one of the best sci-fi series ever. But yes, the characters are just so one-dimensional.
I feel like that's the same with a lot of science fiction. So yeah,
Paddy, I'll push Hyperion by Dan Simmons one more time.
I started an audiobook of that a while ago. I should have given it longer because I didn't get into it.
It's good. Yeah, he's a good writer, and it's
okay.
Good fiction. Yeah,
people talk about the Shrike a lot. I don't know what the Shrike is, but that's meant to be
pretty
awesome. Made flesh. Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Hyperion's definitely on my list too.
Hyperion,
very close on my list. I think it's in the next few books I'm gonna pick up. I'm gonna combine the next 2 questions, and here's how it goes. I'm gonna ask you to say, what genre do you usually write in? And because I imagine a lot of us write in more than one genre. What is the difference between when you write one genre than the other? Some of us I know have genres that are very close, like we write sci-fi and we write horror, sometimes a bit the same. Some of us have been writing things that are wildly different from one another. They're looking at you, Ali. And I'd love to see how it affects your writing. Do you feel like your writing voice is different when you got a different genre?
Oh boy.
Tough question.
Yeah.
I'll jump in because
Start by saying what's your genre.
Yeah.
Sure, because I've worked across many different genres, and that's kind of the nature of projects coming to me in screenplay, and then I'll be like, yes, I'm an expert in that. I can write that for you, which is always the correct answer. So my first credits are in rom-com, and then I guess my next big credit then is in diesel punk. So I was a bit more at home writing in diesel punk, and I wanted to show off a little bit of Hunk of Crystal while we're here, at least for the YouTube
Ooh.
people at home.
Yeah.
Nice.
So there's the actual Augie that I
Wow.
picked up last week, the Australian Writers Guild. So that was for Metropius, won Most Outstanding Animation, specifically the screenplay. So that was that's a really fun award. So
That's very
I
cool.
really enjoy. Oh, thank you. I
Yeah.
enjoy
no, very
writing in
cool.
diesel punk because that's sci-fi, that feels homegrown. And at the moment I'm tinkering in psychological thriller, horror, and I feel like I'm learning that as I'm going. That's a go away, skill up, watch a horror movie, learn what they did well, go and try and do that in real time. Like it's not something that's come naturally to me, but I'm putting in the effort to work out how to do it because it doesn't feel as natural. A mistake I learned, I don't know if we call it a mistake, but so my first have a go at teaching myself to write a full-length manuscript was in fantasy. That was Majesty. And then my second was in historical fiction. And some feedback I got from a publisher was at times it feels like childlike whimsy, and at other times it can be quite dark and the themes are very real. And I went away asking myself why my historical fiction felt that way. And then I realized that's fantasy. I had written my historical fiction with almost this inherent lens of fantasy, because fantasy, I enjoy fantasy because it carries both that sense of wonder, that whimsy, and balances it with quite dark and nasty and real scenes. And that's a genre that happily accepts these two shades happening.
Yeah, it's almost like the lights are really light and the darks are really dark, and that's the space it plays in.
And I had done that in historical fiction, and a reader had found that quite alienating. So it was an opportunity for me to go back and be like, well, at least now that I'm aware of what I've done, do I want to pull that back? Or if I'm going to lean into it, at least I can lean into it aware of what I'm doing, so I can hold the reader's hand through it more. So that was just an accidental thing I noticed I had doing. Clearly that was just my voice, and because I had read and consumed so much fantasy, when I had jumped into a different genre, I had taken that with me unintentionally.
Well, I think these leaks happen to a lot of us. For example, when I write short stories, I almost always lean into horror because I find it really satisfying to have that payoff, the reward that horror offers so quickly, right? The horror has this amazingly satisfying ending, I find, in short stories, because you answer the question: will they survive? Won't they survive? What's happening? What is the thing behind the curtain? That's something you get in horror, because it's more of a question of the thing. Whereas fantasy, which I try to do with my long form novels, asks deeper questions, longer to answer. The themes have to be a bit more prolonged than just what is the creature? Are they going to make it? And I noticed that sometimes when I write tense scenes in my fantasy novel, I feel a bit like horror Matan, that suddenly the sentences get very short, a lot of tough, tight punctuation, just really cutting it off, leaving a lot of details out. And then I think to myself, was this too sparse? Was I going to my other voice for this? And that's something I'm trying to manage to really, like, if I'm writing a YA fantasy, I'm not supposed to scare the bejesus out of my writer, right? Out of my reader. But that's something to watch. It's not as wildly different as what Ali's doing, but I'm still trying to to manage the two.
Well, in fairness, Matan, your novel work that you're going through, Absolution, does contain quite a few horror elements. So I would say it's not wholly divorced from that style itself. For myself, I've tried to write a couple of literary things. There's only one I think I've really effectively followed through on and completed in a way that I'm happy with it. I think I sent it to you, Patty, the one about the pool, the guy like who's swimming in the beach pool.
That was so good.
Oh, I read that. I read that.
That was really good. Alex, you need to write more character drama, man. You're so good with character dialogue and characters.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, it's something I can really lean into because I do naturally go towards that. So there's always a part of me going, maybe should I just do literary stuff? I don't know.
Yes.
There you go.
Not just, but you should just do a little.
But I kind of like I sort of hedged my bets a little with that one and made it overblown. Like I made the language a little more flowery, I guess, which is not my natural way to go. When I'm writing sort of horror stuff, it does tend to be pretty condensed and pretty compressed and all that sort of stuff. So I was kind of almost parodying like literary fiction stuff, but I think I when I finished it, I got away with it. And to its credit, I find literary fiction, even though it is a little more flowery, it is very readable. I can fly through a literary book really quickly, whereas a horror thing I'll read for about 2 hours and be like, okay, I'm going to take a break now, and then I'll come back to it later. So yeah, I think those are definitely, they're definitely different styles, and it's a different idiom that you want to lean into when you're doing it. And sometimes I have to allow myself to be a little more flowery with my language. And that's something I'm trying to do maybe some more in the horror stuff I'm doing as well. But yeah.
So my starting genre is not I did not start writing literary fiction. I actually started writing children's books. And that was actually a pretty big upskill in one of the problems I do have, which I'm reflecting on now. And so like one of the things that attracts me to literary fiction is that like you can kind of get lost in certain details, get lost in the mundane, and spend some time in someone's day, spend some time in someone's shoes. And so sometimes what I'll do is when I'm writing, I will lose track of the plot. I will sort of like, I do need to hold myself down and make sure I have a strong thread that permeates through the whole thing. And it's very easy for me to be like, oh, but look at these trees though. Like, and look at this relationship he has to these trees. And it's so beautiful. And like, sometimes I can get lost in a scene and like I get lost in the characters, and I really do need to be like, rein it back in and hold myself to that. So yeah, children's books were a good tool for that because you do have very few words. So there's no room to be flowery. Yeah, so I got good at trimming fat pretty quick.
I'll just say that one of the best horror books I've read recently was written by a children books author. She has written children books her whole life for 20 years, I believe. Alex, correct me if I'm butchering the name. The horror book was published under Kingfisher.
Kingfisher, yeah. I think it's actually YA written as well, but
yeah. It's called The Twisted Ones, and I don't know what is it about, because you had writers like Roald Dahl, who also wrote children books and horror. There's something about
Roald Dahl wrote horror.
Telling the
it's the suppression, the oppression of the 500 words that you're stuck to. They're
Lamb
breaking
to the
out,
slaughter,
like,
man.
Interesting.
I teach his stories in my English class, and some of them are wild.
He's a master of the short story.
He's great. Patty,
James, you go.
I would predominantly write science fiction with like strong horror elements, and I think that came out of trying to write survival horror, but feeling like an awful lot of the concepts and ideas that came out of the settings and an awful lot of the characters that came out of those stories made for much better character-driven stories, or just much better straightforward horror stories. So when I'm going for something shorter, that's usually because I have the ending in mind already, and it tends to be a horror story because I already have the scare in mind and I'm just writing my way towards that. And when I tend to write something longer, it tends to be because I have a character or some kind of idea that I'm interested in exploring, and I start writing that without really being sure where it's going, and then I have to find the story in the edits and in the rewrites of that.
Yeah, right on.
What about you, Pads?
I think I've done a lot less writing than all of you guys, actually. My back catalog's just not as big. There are times in my life where I started writing, I put down, like, let's say 10,000 words of something that was meant to be longer, and then I abandoned it. I'm only really just now starting to write. But all my unfinished stuff was mostly science fiction. or weird fiction. Have you guys ever heard of the kind of subgenre weird fiction?
Yeah, like
yes.
Lovecraftian stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Lovecraft is kind of weird
Absurdist.
fiction. Sometimes absurdist, sometimes it's fiction, but there's something just uncanny and strange about the world. Like, again, Philip K. Dick. A lot of his stuff isn't really science fiction. It's more just the real world, but something's just wrong. And in his case, that's induced by drug-based paranoia.
Stories that often aren't aiming to make the world, to describe the world as it is, but to sort of bring you into a world that's just slightly off kilter or slightly off.
It's like
exactly.
surrealist.
Yeah, there's something surreal about it.
The uncanny valley, just like close enough to be.
Exactly. Like I've got a document sheet about as long as I am tall of ideas for stories, and it's all like science fiction stuff pretty much. So
but you know
sci-fi.
what I really liked about your Behemoth story is that it really does try to connect this incredibly titanic creature and completely complete fantasy story, but you still kind of draw it into our reality towards the end.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, it could have happened and we're just standing on the bones of this terrible thing.
Oh, that's what I love about science fiction, though. It's the 1 foot planted in the real world. Yeah.
It could be here, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, that's me. I'm just gonna fill up my list a little bit more.
That is something I love about the tool of writing in science fiction, is that you're almost able to explore human behavior or human societies or ideas within these incredibly often exaggerated scenarios or situations.
Yeah, absolutely. We've recorded an episode where I go on at length about soft science fiction, which will be released soon, hopefully. And that's exactly what it does. It's all about being able to explore like humans, but what happens if the humans were in this particular rat maze? You know?
Yeah.
Guys, we're gonna take a teeny tiny break. You guys should not feel that break, and we'll be back in a moment. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back. Congratulations, listeners. You have just time traveled roughly 6 minutes into the future because we are back
gosh, I feel
after
sick.
our break. Yeah, speaking
It was terrible.
If we throw up, it's because of the wormhole. Back to where we were, we're going to discuss more genres. But as you might have noticed if you're following us, and if you're listening, you're definitely following us, so you definitely know. But the new anthology, the new Mythic, is coming out. I'm not sure when you're going to listen to this podcast. It might already be out when you're listening. The new Mythic, Ali's holding it if you're watching the YouTube version.
Yeah.
It is a delightful, terrifying, anxiety-inducing collection of short stories written by yours truly, all of us. But you guys have all vouched for your favorite genre. You've all said what genre you usually write. Time to see if you actually submitted that kind of story to the collection. What genre is your story within the new Mythic? What do you got, guys?
Sci-fi.
Sci-fi. It's not
that is the
literary
curveball.
fiction.
Phoenix says sci-fi.
Sci-fi, a little bit alternate history, right, Phoenix?
Yeah.
Alternate
history,
future,
sci-fi.
alternate history.
Yeah. Alternate present that becomes alternate future.
What's the name of this?
It's called Enter Elias Schmidt.
Wow.
I've been saying Elias this whole time. I feel like an idiot.
I've been calling her Crandall.
It's you're neither.
That's what happens when you're only rated on the page, I guess.
So no spoilers, but what turns it into sci-fi? Are people space traveling, time traveling, shooting lasers at each other? What's sci-fi about it?
It does just really the thing that's sci-fi about it is it just takes our technology it takes the technology dial and just turns it a little bit further ahead of where we are, and so it just kind of explores a hypothetical and turns it to beyond the red into the colors beyond red.
It's got robots.
I love
robots. But they're not
I love your
called
story
that.
because
They're called something different.
We don't use the R word here.
Yeah, don't use the R word, please.
I love your story because I feel like sci-fi to me is basically writers trying to imagine what can be as opposed to fantasy. Fantasy is what probably never was. But your sci-fi is really, really just you imagining what could have been or what can be. And I love it in a very anxiety-inducing way.
Yeah.
Thank you. The good kind of anxiety.
Yeah. it's really good for that, actually. I love the way you start firmly planted in the real world and you build up one level and then another level and then another level until by the
Then you're
story's like
out.
even mid part, it's already a completely different world, but it's so plausible the steps you've taken to get there. It's really strong science fiction.
Thank you.
Paddy, since you've been talking, what genre is yours?
You know, it's got all the trappings of science fiction in that there's like technology above people hitting each other with clubs, but really it's fantasy. Really, it's fantasy. It's fantasy in the same way that Star Wars is, I'm gonna say. This is like a little controversial, but even though
Wait,
Star Wars has
is
spaceships and
fantasy?
well, Matan, listen to my upcoming posted episode about soft science fiction, and I'll tell you all about it. But even though like there is some high technology, really it's a complete flight of fancy. It's a complete imagining. It's heroes, it's villains, it's techno fantasy or sci fantasy. Not science fiction, sci fantasy. What does that mean? Pick up the anthology, The New Mythic, being released soon, and read to find
Wait,
out.
Coming soon
what's
on
it
Amazon
called?
near you.
It is called The Traitor.
The Traitor.
Mhm.
Techno fantasy at its best. Thank you, Paddy. Alex.
So mine is survival horror. Actually, it's a fun story because not the story itself. I mean, the story itself I think is
It's
fun,
also a
but
fun story.
the story
I
of
don't
the
think
story.
it's fun within the story.
Yeah, it was the first thing I wrote, and I've probably explained this before, and I remember just walking through the tunnel that goes between Central and another part of Sydney, and just being like, man, this is a good setting for like some sort of spooky thing. And it was the first thing I'd ever written of that nature, which was cool. But it's horror. It has all the trappings of horror. It's very, very character driven. The thing I like, it's a zombie story, and the thing I like about zombie stories is like it's not really about the zombies. Zombies are a metaphor for something else, and this is very much that. I like the fact that it plays into the the dynamics of the group, and hopefully isn't too contrived and too cliche in the way that James doesn't like horror things to be that he mentioned. But yeah, I think it fulfills all the elements of horror trope stuff, and it's a little bit relatable and believable too, which takes from some of that sci-fi aspect, I think, as well.
Alex's stands out in the anthology for being embedded in real world places and locations really firmly. Like even though yours could as well, Phoenix, you don't name places and well, you do. You have your little intro, but then
You have one.
But then as yours kicks off, it's no longer about naming exact places and times.
Yeah,
While Alex,
that's
we're
true.
very firmly walking streets of Sydney that we know. You can trace it, and that's a very cool
It's so
detail.
cool.
Which I really liked, and it made me realize, like, all the films set in, like, let's say, London or Paris or New York, like, the people that live there or have been there the story must take on, like, a whole different dimension to them. Reading Alex's story set in Sydney is like, oh, wait, this is real. This is a real place. And for the first time, I got that sense of, like, oh, man, like, the fact that it's rooted in the real world is that much stronger.
Yeah, I think I left a comment on one of Alex's drafts being like one of the streets he names they have to walk up. I'm like, they'd be really exhausted walking up that street because that's really steep. That's a long walk.
Yeah. There was actually a lot of comments saying like, this is good. We really like the environmental landscape aspect of this. Can you play that up? Can you explain it more? And I was like, I'll try.
And I gotta say, the illustration that we had made for your story, I mean, I've shown it to so many people, and all of them are like, yeah, I know where this is. I know exactly where this is. And it's Alex is smiling. Nice.
I'm not going to say anything about that particular picture.
Yeah.
It's a good picture.
Because,
I also wanted to say that something about all three of those stories was that, as Alex said, even though they're survival horror and kind of science fiction, like all of them had strong characters. Like none of you sacrificed character for storyline. They all had really good characters driving storylines forward.
And yours too, James. I think yours is.
Tell us about yours.
Possibly the most character driven. All of them.
Cheers. Mine, I guess, would be, I don't know, psychological thriller or political intrigue. I guess it kind of feels like a bit of a thriller. I just don't know what style. It was definitely a story.
Political intrigue, almost. I'd say
political intrigue. Okay, that feels like it makes sense. It was a story that grew out of a attempt to write a survival horror. That's how I came up with the culture and the society and the characters, and I ended up writing this what came out of it was this very short, condensed story about these two characters basically in conflict with one another within the kind of larger machinations of a convoy trying to travel across the post-apocalyptic America. So yeah, I guess a bit of political intrigue, quite a tense, condensed, compacted, paranoid story.
Claustrophobic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very, very claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Tell us what it's called.
Is called Cooling Engines.
Cooling Engines.
Yeah.
Nice. Ali, tell us about your submission into the anthology.
My short submission, my not so short submission. The Stolen Sword is my story, and I think it is very typically fantasy slash. I think I lean into being defined as YA fantasy, in that I have quite young protagonists. Matan, you and I share kind of the youngest protagonists, I think, of this anthology. Yours might be younger than mine, actually, but mine kind of has the trappings of the coming of age-ness that gets associated with YA in a fantasy setting. Why is it a fantasy setting? We have characters who have magical abilities, even though it was poked fun of before that I have a hard no M word rule. It's not called magic at any point in the story. It's its own in-world ability.
Yeah.
They are a type of people who can increase their strength and speed and do extra mental arts on top of it. But we don't call it magic, but it is magic for the sake of the genre. And there's also artifacts like in worlds that have special magical properties as well. So that's what firmly embeds it as fantasy. It's also technology-wise in your medieval settings. You're wielding swords, you're pre-crossbows in terms of technology. So that's also what gives it that very much rooted in a medieval setting as well. In terms of, I like to think of it as more of a shonen anime to myself, in that I'm leaning structurally into tropes of shonen anime, in that the fights are the set pieces I've built the story around. In this short story, I think there's like 4 fights. No, there's 5. So there's 5 fight set pieces is how I've structured this 13K short story. And then so the story's about moving from one fight scene to the next. So that's why it's a shonen anime in my mind, because that's how you plot. That's what shonen animes are fueled on, is how other characters driving to the next fight set piece.
And the plot really races along as a result of that, actually. It really does. Is just like bam, bam, bam.
Yeah.
And I love the fight scenes. I think you really brought in, like, I guess, the screenwriting ability to kind of really choreograph them really well and really stylize and make them really, really good. Like, the action's excellent in it.
Oh, thank you, James.
I think one of the fantasy writers that does it better, I know it's funny to name drop him twice in a pod, but Sanderson is like the king of shonenizing fantasy book.
Yep.
My story, Glyphlight, is horror. It is a horror story because there are things that go about in the dark unseen, and there are people who are forced to spend time in that dark with those things, which is classically horror. I think the tone is different from Alex's horror story, because Alex's story takes place in the real world. It's something that is with real people. Mine is more fantasy horror. It's a bit like Ali's technologically. It's maybe a bit further along, maybe 16th, 15th century. No phones to call the cops. And hopefully you enjoy it, and you'll see if they make it or not.
Like, no shade to anyone else's, because I think they're all great stories, but I think Glyphlight is my favorite just because of its combination of genres and just the way that it brings everything together like that. It's got a very unique setting and tone, I think. And you really devote a lot of love to each of the characters as well. You really feel the sense of them as people.
I love your main character quite a lot.
So when I heard, Matan's book, his short story for the anthology is based on a larger work that he's writing called Absolution. Alex, when you heard Absolution, did you get any Bloodborne vibes?
Oh, you know what? In retrospect, yes, definitely. But I wouldn't have.
But it's like Bloodborne if the guy doesn't really have any abilities, though.
Still, the tone and the dark, almost like pre-Victorian and the Gothic Yeah, I definitely got that vibe from it.
Yeah. In retrospect, I can definitely see that, but I hadn't made that connection. But absolutely.
For anyone who has no idea what that is, Bloodborne is a video game.
I think James was the first one to make that comment to me in one of the feedbacks you gave me. I think you mentioned Bloodborne.
Some of the first stuff of yours I read was when the storm had come, so it felt very much the beginning section of Bloodborne where night is falling and everyone is kind of getting ready for that. And it had that sense of the city going dark and stuff like that, and it was kind of felt along those lines, which I really, really liked. Right. And as well as that, as a huge horror fan, I loved Glyphlight. Like, it was one of my favorite stories to read when we were going through like the first drafts. I just adored it. Really, really good.
I do enjoy it. I feel like we have a great variety between us, because we have like the hardcore sci-fi, we have really traditional high fantasy with a bit of a shonen kick to it. We have Patty's story, which is, it's kind of combines sci-fi fantasy, techno fantasy, if you want to call it. I feel like no two stories, and it's funny because we didn't even plan this. We didn't say, okay, you do this, you do that. It just kind of happened. And Alex wrote this not realistic, but this urban horror. And I think it just worked out organically, and I'm super happy about it. So yeah, definitely get the anthology. It's already available for pre-order. If you're time travelers, then maybe you're already reading the bestseller version of it in a few years. And Ali's holding it once more. Guys, before we continue, I just want to play a game. And we're gonna play a game.
I love this about you hosting this.
We're gonna pitch you against one another. There can be only one victor, and I am gonna keep the score on my phone.
I'm too Slytherin for
this. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm just going to have it in front of me. Guys, I have collected the opening lines of several well-known and perhaps not well-known books.
Yes.
And I'm going to have guess the genre of the book. You're going to have to guess the genre of the book just from the first line.
Oh.
Okay.
Now, no, I'm going to read out the first line. You guys just think about it, make your guess. Now, I'm going to be honest, a lot of these books are well-known to you guys. So if you say the name of the book, you get 2 points instead of 1. 1 point for guessing the genre, 2 points if you actually know the book. Now, I know for a fact that all of you have read at least one of the books that I picked, if not more than one. I try not to pick books that I know only one of you read, though some of them. All right,
should we raise our hands?
Should we put our hands
just
up?
Scream. That's what they do in my class.
I think we're just going to yell.
This is going to make for great audio, guys. Absolutely fantastic.
We can cut it. We can
cut it. Really enjoy editing this. It's going to be... Now let's do it.
Okay. So I'm just going to tell you some of the options are fantasy, sci-fi, horror, romance, and literature. Okay? Are you ready?
Yes.
Book number 1. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy
magical
dreams,
realism,
he found himself. Wait, let me finish. He found himself transformed into his bed into a gigantic insect.
Metamorphosis.
Yep, Metamorphosis.
But what genre is the Metamorphosis? That's a good
sci-fi surrealism.
Yeah, I think
wait, who said it first? It's absurdist horror, I believe. Who said Metamorphosis first?
Wow.
Who's the point going to? Was James first? Or?
I know, I think Ali got that one. It's called Metamorphosis, yeah? Yeah, it was Ali.
I mean, I did say Ali. Magical realism pretty early, but that's okay. I'll see my point. I'm generous like that.
Okay. I'm the unbiased judge. Ali, you have 1 point. All right, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
A beginning is the time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct.
Fantasy.
It sounds like fantasy.
It's gotta be fantasy, yeah. Don't know the book there.
It's talking about balance, which is very
literature. I'm just gonna guess literature.
Okay, once I say everybody's got their guess. Yeah. Fantasy. I
think everyone got it.
Once I say the second line, all of you are gonna go, "Oh, I know this one." So a beginning is the time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct. This every sister of the Ben Gesserit knows.
Oh, Dune. But which Dune?
Oh, Dune, yes, Dune.
Dune.
It is first Dune? All right.
So no points. Nobody had it right. Okay, let's go another one. The hegemony console set on the balcony of his ebony spaceship.
Science fiction.
Okay.
As soon as you say hegemony.
Patty, You should get the point, but you gotta let me finish.
Okay. Fair enough.
You do get
I
the
just
point
get
this time, but
overexcited.
you
I'm
gotta-
sorry.
It's okay. Patty's got the point. It is Dan Simmons, Hyperion, as James have
Ah.
mentioned. Nice. Let's go with this one. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of
Haunting
absolute
Hill House.
reality.
Yeah. Yes, Haunting Hill House.
James, that's 2 points for the name. And wow, you guys really know these books.
I literally just read it.
Yeah,
Right.
when you said it, I'm like, crap, that's one of the books I chose. All right. Okay. You ready? Okay.
Yeah.
Book number 4. Nellie had never known such intense pleasure.
Romance.
Sounds
Romance.
romantic.
Yeah.
No, it's horror. No, I'm joking. It is romance slash erotica. He belongs to her by Sunny Chambers, a
Wow.
former member of the Open Genre Group, by the way. Helen
Really?
Grant, for those of you.
I was going to say, is this a regular on your
Published.
shelf, Matan?
Huh.
You're supporting
yes.
a former writing group
Absolutely.
member.
Who was the first one to say romance?
Hey, I'm pretty sure.
Alex.
Who was it who wrote it?
Alex again.
Who's the
Helen
writer?
Grant.
Yeah.
Published under Sunny
romance?
Chambers.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow.
All right, you
Wrote
ready?
Some,
Saucy
steamy
romance
stuff.
there.
Steamy.
So far,
Yeah.
some
guys,
of it.
James
yeah.
is leading with 2 points because he guessed the name. Let's go with another one that I know a lot of you read. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the name. Ratvenko leaned against the bar and tucked his nose into his dirty
Fantasy.
shot glass.
Yeah, that's
Fantasy.
fantasy. Don't know what though.
Yeah. If there's a bar, it's fantasy. That's true.
I'm going to continue. The whiskey had failed to warm him. Nothing could get you warm in this saint-forsaken city.
Mm.
Well, it is fantasy. It is Six of Crows
Yes.
by Lee Bardugo,
Oh,
and
no,
Phoenix
I've
gets
read
it.
That.
That's a good name.
I know.
Okay.
Mm.
All right, we don't have many left.
How'd you say the character's name?
Ritvenko? Am I butchering it? I don't know. It's not even a main character. It's a
Yeah,
prologue.
no,
character.
yeah, it is like a side character. Yeah. Or barely, it's an
Okay,
extra. Yeah.
Okay, the next one is really short first sentence, and I just know one of you should scream. Okay.
Moby Dick.
Ash. Okay. No, I didn't put that. I wanted to, but I didn't. Call me Ishmael. Anyway, ash fell from the sky.
Mistborn. Fantasy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Unbothered.
That's good.
Bring a Brandon
good.
Sanderson book to this.
Okay. Let's see. Ready? This is a long one. You gotta let me finish. Do not say anything before I finish. All right?
No promises.
Behave, kids. Louis Creed, who had lost his father at 3 and who had never known a grandfather, never expected a father as he entered his middle age.
It's
But that
definitely
was
literary.
exactly what happened. Although he called this man a friend, as a grown man must do when he finds the man who should have been his father relatively late in life.
Definitely literary.
That's powerful.
Mm.
Yeah, that's definitely literary fiction, right?
Yeah.
It's making
It
poetry out of
sounds-
the
certainly
mundane.
sounds like
Not
it.
Brandy Sandy.
So if it's
Not
if it
Brandy
is
Sandy.
literary, if it is literary, Alex gets the points. Okay,
Brandy
guys, you want to know? This was
Yeah.
a Stephen King book.
No.
Pet Cemetery
Ah.
horror.
It's
Pet Cemetery? Really?
Yeah, Alex, that's how it starts.
All right.
Should be on this,
okay.
Alex.
I've read that
Flipping a
book. That's a
postman.
great book.
Yeah.
That's a great book. Damn.
Also, I
Yeah,
really like that
okay,
all of these sound like movie trailers, the way Matan reads.
Okay, we got 2 more already.
Mhm. This is fun.
Yes.
We're gonna do another short one. Let's find it. Okay. For a long time, the horizon had been a monotonous, flat blue line separating the Pacific Ocean from the sky.
Sci-fi.
Historical?
This is really familiar.
Master and Commander.
It is Sphere by Michael Crichton, the guy who wrote Jurassic Park, and Phoenix gets the point for sci-fi.
Hey, good guess.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we got 3 points for Ali, 2 for James, 2 for Phoenix, 1 for Alex, 1 for Patty. A double guess from anyone can get a victory or a tie with Ali. Now, the next one is kind of obvious. So, all right, you gotta let me finish. Seriously, you have to let me finish. All right. Wow, this is not the one I wanted to finish with. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. I'm going to finish this. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of the noisiest authorities insisted on it being received.
Was it a tale
for
of two
good or for
cities?
evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only.
A tale of two cities.
It is.
Yes,
Of course. That's like one of those. Come on, man. The blast of times. I'm so happy you did that one.
We're going to the tiebreaker because we got Ali
What
and
genre
Patty with
is
3
that,
each.
though? How would you classify
That's
it?
literary.
Historical fiction.
Straight literary?
Who got it, Patty?
Okay, hold on.
Is it historical at the
briefly kicked
time?
out.
Okay.
I'm going to have to go to the
my
bookshelf
feed was
for the
sabotaged.
tiebreaker.
Maybe it was, Alex. Maybe it was.
All right. I chose a book I think none of you know because I never spoke about it with any of you guys. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
It's a really short one. That's the tiebreaker. Names may be forgotten.
Fantasy?
Horror?
Sci-fi?
This is Strange the Dreamer by Lenny Taylor, and it is fantasy.
Yeah.
Ali, congratulations. You win the inaugural
Nicely
genre
win.
guessing game.
What made you think it was
Oh,
fantasy,
boy.
Ali? What was the giveaway?
Because it made me think of another fantasy book.
Yeah, the
Because
name of the
names are
wind.
often associated like with magic and the power names can hold in magic systems is a
Yeah.
reoccurring trope of fantasy
Yeah.
books.
Yeah.
Well picked.
As well as The Lies of Laclamora.
It's reoccurring, yeah, in many books, this idea that names hold
Yeah.
power. Yeah. So
I was so ready for the name of the wind. I'm like, oh, here we go. Here we go. Give
Right?
it to me.
We're all
Talk
prepped
about the
for that
silence.
prologue. We know
Talk
how
about the
it's
silence.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for participating in this game, guys. I will just finish by telling our listeners that we are extremely proud of the anthology that we have created together. We believe some of these stories are really incredible and may represent our current picks as writers. We highly, highly recommend you give them a choice. They're all short stories. Some of them could be read in 1 hour, 2 hour sittings. You will not regret it. You may find them on Amazon, on our Facebook page. There are a ton of links, Twitter, Instagram. Just find us.
We'll put a link in the description.
Yeah.
We will put the link in the description. Please contact us if you have any thoughts about genres. If you are writing and there's a specific genre you enjoy writing more than the other, please let us know. You can find us almost everywhere. Ali's showing some of the
Look at that
illustrations.
beautiful art. So good.
We're just going to finish with a quote.
Before I was just gonna say
Go ahead.
also if you get the anthology, when you get the anthology and when you love it, which I guarantee you're going to, because you're a human. I hope. Well, you know what? I'm not gonna. I don't hope you're a human. If you're not a human and you're listening, like, hello, it's nice to talk to you. When you love this book, if you give it a review on Amazon, that really helps us and would help other people find it as well, who would also love this book, as well as like tell a friend, share it. We're really proud of it. We want people to read it because we put a lot of time. I think it was a year in the editorial on this. Like we put a lot of time into these. So have a good time. Tell some people. Let them have a good time. Don't be selfish. Tell people.
Share's a good time. Don't keep it to yourself.
Definitely give it a shot, guys. We're going to finish with a tiny quote relating to the genre conversation we had. It goes like this. It's by Albert Camus. Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. And that is something that I think holds true to almost every genre.
It's pronounced Camo.
Camos, thank you.
But it doesn't stop it being a great quote.
All right, thank you for listening, guys. Please catch us next week and the week after and the week after and the week after. And read the anthology.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.